Okay, well, hello and welcome to Can't You Hear Me, Gnostic? Context in Creation. I had originally had up a little earlier title of Are You in the Dreaming? But I can always kind of go there within the context in creation. Starting a half an hour late tonight, this way here, the small storm that came my way moments, like 10 minutes before showtime, I was able to deal with it, because this way here I don't have to think about dealing with it later on. And it was the responsible thing to do. Uncle Butchie is playing this weekend at a friend has like a kind of a yearly party, and so we're going to play there, and there's a band coming in from DC that doesn't have a bass player. So she had asked would I consider playing. I said, well, let me see a set list. Oh, it's all, it's all covers. And then I get the set list she said it's all originals. Then I get the set list, it's all covers except for one original, and with the chart. So it was going to be a lot of work, and there's no remuneration. It would just be a lot of stress and work to help out a band that I never met, and I couldn't do. There's no way I could do it responsibly. So anyway, that's what I dealt with before coming on here. So now, and which is kind of like it's kind of par for the course of what we're going through. Okay, so let me, before I get going, I just want to say hello, Madfinger and Amanda, and Meandering Mystic and Jessica, Raksha and Deborah, and Robin. So, yes, context in creation. Context is a word that, hello RC and Christian and Aaron. Context, I'll say hello when I come back in, so I can kind of get started here. Context in everything, but in creation it becomes particularly important. And right now we're going through earth changes, and the earth changes are about the earth herself having agency and changing things around. And so that's why the original title, before I changed it to Context of Creation with the help of my brother Raksha, was about being out of context in the creation of the changes of in the creation of a new world on the planet. Once again, do not confuse the word world with earth or planet, plane, realm, whatever you want. There is what is natural and there's what is unnatural, and the world is unnatural. So just so we get that straight. So when I use the world, I mean the world. I mean the place where fictions have the same place in their legal system as people do, and then in their legal system, people are fictions. So you can, again, it's the fuckery of it all is immense, and it needs to be dismantled. There is an absolute need to dismantle it. And if to dismantle it, it takes if it takes some real ass kicking on this planet, then that's probably how it's going to happen. It doesn't have to be that way. We could collectively get it, but To get it would mean for many people to abandon belief systems. Some people seem to feel that gnosis is a belief system. Gnosis is an experience. Gnosis is a knowing based on experiencing the viability, the interaction, and the validity of the Sophianic narrative. So being as only a very small minority of people are really operating within the dreaming, there will be a lot of asses getting kicked. And of course, most of us have friends and loved ones who are out of context in creation. And so therefore, we will be called to support. This isn't about, trying to leave anybody behind. But, it's going to get to a point, there's only so many people that fit into a medic's tent before some people are going to die online waiting to be attended to. So, we're in very let's get real times, and it's not for any one of us to tell another what getting real is, other than to share what getting real is for those of us who feel that we're in what is real. And once that sharing is done, there's only so much you can do. But it's kind of like being, the conspiracy theorist, as other people will tag you, a truther in a group of people who think you're full of crap until things start going down. Being an herbalist that nobody listens to until every doctor they've gone to has said, I don't know how to deal with this. Those kind of situations. And it's very frustrating because of the resistance. People resist. They just they haven't got time to break from their routines of what they do, whether it's a belief system, whether it's the habits of their day, how they entertain themselves. But okay, that's kind of my opening statement. And again, I was dealing with less than uplifting things. So I'm just going to settle in a little bit. I'm going to greet a few people that I might not have greeted yet. So it's AJ. Hello, AJ, and Marie, and Sarath. Jorge. Hello, Jorge. Soul Traveler. Okay, looks like a whole lot of greeting going on. That's nice. That's good to see. Foxadre, hello. Hey, Foxadre, the private messaging on YouTube is about to come to an end. I would love to have your email. And so if you, I don't know if you know, but like when you go to somebody's YouTube thing, there's an About tab on the right-hand side. And then when you hit that, there's two small icons. One of them will be to report a video. Be nice not to hit that one, but if you'd be willing to share your email with me, that would be a way to get it to me that, only I can see it while this feature lasts. And they're bringing it to an end relatively shortly, as far as I can tell. Thank you. Oh, let me put this. I realized I had put a little message in here myself to get things started, and I never hit enter. So there it is. Greetings to all. So I'm a little curious if anybody is experiencing rather frenetic times in the psychological space. Although, I mean, like from what I'm experiencing, there's plenty of people who seem to be comfortably numb, and will stay that way until that opportunity is no longer there. Yeah, I regarding sleep, last night I managed to get 3 hours of sleep. Then I woke up and was unable to really fall back to sleep. I mean, I'm not in exactly the most serene setting often because of close proximity to a TV. But I did fall asleep when it was off. But I have to. There's quite a bit going on, and I think there's some there's a lot. This isn't about doom and gloom. Earth changes is about positive, is about going in a good place. But there are sometimes to go down a good path, you might have to dynamite something that's been in the path and thinks it belongs there. A little coffee. I took a nap until about an hour ago. I got up because I only got 3 hours sleep last night. Well, Jorge, the weather is part of Earth changes. I mean, this is an intelligent orchestration. This isn't there's nothing haphazard about what's going on here. There's certainly there will be novelty. There'll be spontaneity. But it's certainly not coming from a place of chaos. Hello, Oswald. But to kind of come, much of that understanding comes from sitting in the Gnostic seat, or the seat of the Telestai, because the Sophianic narrative addresses everything that's going on. There's a complete understanding of why things are happening. It's not like there's a precognition of what's coming, but there's a gnosis of what one sees going on around. And when proximity to people who have no context in creation, or the wrong context, or context that's in error. That's the word I want to use. It can get messy. And the whole purpose of when things get messy in error is so that you can say, "Ooh, this is the path with all the thorns on it." And no fruit. Matter of fact, there's not even any roses growing. This is just plain old thorns. And I kind of, it's interesting because I now have made contacts with other people who are within the dreaming, within Sophia's dreaming, and they have a similar sense of calm. Even they have a sense of calm, a sense of understanding what's going on around us, and even people peripherally, or partially, kind of knowing about the Sophianic narrative, but are very earth-based, they're naturally tuned in. They also hear the voice of the mother and understand what's happening right now. Thank you, Raksha. And so I have some incense burning now, but I didn't have time. I have plenty of candles nearby, but I didn't have time to do it right. Since Friday night, every candle I've lit has had a purpose. Of course, the one for Friday night had to do with builder bugs. Bugs that like to build on the earth, things that are not very nice things. Unless you like false things, or things that are not really part of nature, not part of the natural cycle of things. But so that was Friday night. So my Saturday, I usually burn one, because these are like 10-hour candles. So Saturday I had something to accomplish with candle, and did that. And then last night, you just might have seen that Raksha said it went. Things went amazingly and surprisingly well. So that's what last night's candle was, towards creating that news. And so to just, I'd love to have a candle burning. I usually do. But with all the things going around, I couldn't really just kind of get centered and say, okay, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of this candle? And so it'll wait. After the show, I will figure out what to charge the candle with, kind of the assignment for it, and then I will enjoy its company. So in the meantime, I'll just keep my incense lit. Looks like I have about another 15 minutes on the Dragon's Blood incense I'm currently burning, the Sai Baba one. Got a very good, and the batches can kind of come and go. I've had champas that were regular champa, then they seem to change it to something I really, really liked, and I've been getting that. I got a sandalwood that really wasn't pleasing the last time I got, I got a Dragon's Blood that wasn't so great. The last one was wonderful. This last time I got a sandalwood that seems not so sandalwoody. They're all really good incenses, and they're clean, and that's what's important. I have some jasmine from Hem that I would not burn because they're too chemical. I don't burn chemicals and expect to get good results. Be kind of like spraying Glade for magical work. I do, and one of the things I like when I have a candle burning is the wood. What is it? It smells a bit like frankincense. It's like Santa something, but it's pieces of wood, and you need to get them burning a little bit for them to smoke properly. Somebody will probably put it in there, and or something Santa. And so when I have a candle burning, it's really easy to get those things hot enough so that they smoke properly. Otherwise, using a lighter, it takes quite a bit of gas from a lighter to get them going. And yeah, Santo Paulo, thank you, Aaron, and meandering. And so I really like when I have that. I really like to have a candle to get that going, and then I'll really just every time it goes out, I'll reignite it, and really, the scent of that is really rich, and it's very close. It's kind of like a wood frankincense instead of a gum based one. And so context in creation. And by the way, I know I do have the two interviews with Lisa Harrison that where John takes the time and really explains the Sophianic narrative. I recommend anybody to at least click on the first one, and if you do not get taken into it, then it's not, I guess, just won't work for you. Hello, Enjoy Being. And hello, Sam. But if you're even a little bit interested, like, what's this Sophianic narrative stuff? The links in the description of every Can't You Hear Me Gnostic have them. It describes them. They're with Lisa Harrison. And they're in 2 parts, but I can guarantee you, if you like the first part, you'll be really glad there's a second part. Yeah, what I think it is so interesting, is here was Lisa Harrison, she had a sit down with him, and, now she has, Lilu talking to her from, Alexa or whatever. Hello, Peace, Hope. And similarly, Miguel Connor, who has Aeon Gnostic Bite, one of his guests was John Lamb Lash. And I remember writing, he started some show with, being on this crappy little planet. And so I just said, well, not in my Sophianic narrative, this isn't a crappy little planet. And I, again, here's somebody calling, names their, both their website and their YouTube channel, Aeon Gnostic Bite Radio. I'm referring to Gaia Sophia as a crappy little planet. It's like, what Gnostic texts are you reading, Miguel? Yeah, no, crappy little planet. And I just, and I said, look, I'm subscribed to you. I'm not going to unsubscribe, but I just, and that's basically, I just kind of left it like, not in my, crappy little planet, ? Not in my Sophianic narrative. And then I went on to say, I'm subscribed, and I'm glad I'm subscribed so I can listen to his guests. But it seems like a lot of his really good guests have been in the past. Some of it, he occasionally has on some people I enjoy listening to, even if they're not quote unquote Gnostic, because they're exploring consciousness. But lately, hello, Lita Blue. Lately, I haven't really heard a show that I can really stay with, because they're, the guests are all over the place. And one of the things I noticed with Miguel, he likes guests that write books. It's like if you get on Miguel's show, the chances are you have a book. And whatever. Yeah, if you like, Gary's okay. I don't know. Gary himself, Gary is not my really. He just doesn't really hold my interest. He's a little, and he just seems a little neurotic to me. A good mind, there's no question, there's no doubting Gary Lockman's intelligence. No question of it at all. Not in his image. Yeah, that is the book. I got that book probably in late 2017. So, I've had it about 6 months, 7 months. And it was great to read it because I like reading. Reading is my original drug. And reading is just something I like doing. Although I really enjoy good storytelling, because that's actually, we're a storytelling species. And that's how we did it way from. That's how it was done before we kind of put a spell on, put the spell of writing on ourselves. I did hear somebody saying, something interesting, how there was probably a time, and maybe like the Egyptian hieroglyphs kind of show a time when a lot of the way we communicated was telepathically. So if you were communicating telepathically, then I can see why one might use hieroglyphs as a way of recording those shared thoughts, as opposed to them meaning words. Because if you're communicating telepathically, you don't have a language per se, at least not with grammar. And letters with assigned sounds that, when assembled, will create the written form of how a word will be sounded when it's pronounced. Hey Sam, I saw you leave a comment on one of the unlisted videos that John has, that he sent out to people on the mailing list. And I agree, it's really great stuff. I wonder if at some point, when he's happy with, because he seems to have some, he seems to care, obviously he always cares about what he puts out, and as if like he wants to put out something a little more polished. And I wonder if that will then become public, or if he's going to keep this stuff unlisted. Be interesting. I went to the print store today to get the Shakti cluster diagram printed out. Excuse me. And first they couldn't read the thumb drive, and then somebody else had to put it in their computer and email it. Then it was coming out black and white, and finally when they got the print in color, it was too big and it overblew the pages. So I was there for almost an hour. Matter of fact, when I went in the store, it was 78 degrees out. When I left the store almost an hour later, it was 68 degrees out, and beginning to rain. So I walked home in a fair. It wasn't. I mean, you could see the rain. It was raining. But fortunately, I had one of my shawls, and I had one of my cotton ones, so I was able to pull it over my head and stay relatively dry. And then when you get home, you take off the wet clothes and, don't start shivering. From what I know, Oswald, that Ginny Thwaite, as she's known, does know John personally. Hello, iWalk. So anyway, they were kind enough to take my phone number and said that they would be working on it. They were kind of very conscious about making me wait, and it's really nice. I'm in a small little town. I walked up there. It was about a mile for me to walk there, and I just was so glad. I mean, actually, there was like the main office, and then there's like another inner office where they have other supplies. And her daughter was in there with her newborn, and the door was being kept closed, and I found that's because she was nursing her newborn. So what a difference of, like, going into a print store where there's behind another door, there's, a mother taking care of her child, and going to Staples or Office Max. So when she was being apologetic about keeping me waiting, I said, something, I'd rather be here waiting than going into some big store. And the dad had come in. He had a little break from work. He came in, visited, his wife and his child. I mean, that's what I like about a small town. what I need. I need that kind of humanness. Need it. I can't, you know, and yeah, I'm just very happy that I even said, I'm just really glad that, you know, that you have a print store here. I mean, this is coming from somebody who grew up in the Bronx, but the Bronx was very, unlike, the Bronx was very neighborhood based. So you might, you know, like from like 183rd Street to 182nd Street with Field Place in the middle was like its own neighborhood. And that was just on Creston Avenue. Where from, if you got to 183rd and then went down to the next street, that was like almost like another neighborhood. There was some overlap. And then as we got older, the neighborhood got a little bit bigger. But we had we had some of the streets that ran across to the avenues, the numbered streets, were where the stores were. So 1 block from me, right on the corner, was a kosher butcher. Opposite that was the neighborhood bar. Next to the neighborhood bar was the non-kosher butcher. And then there was the produce one, and then there were 2 grocery stores on that block. There was a deli there where you could get in the barrel dill pickles, and once they'd been there a while, you could get the half sours or full sours. If a new batch came in, you'd have to say, sorry, all I have is half sours. You might have to wait a few days before I can give you a proper sour pickle. And also a pharmacy was on one of the other corners. Yeah, the 4 corners they had and then there were 4 corners, and one of them was an apartment building. So one was a kosher butcher, one was a bar, and one was a pharmacy. And I used to deliver prescriptions. I would go in there, and somebody had their prescription called in, and I would deliver it to them, and they would tip me a dime or a quarter. And I think the guy at the pharmacy gave me a dime per delivery, and that bought devil dogs and Yankee Doodles and all the other things that somebody who was like 13 years of age was more than pleased to have. And that was in the Bronx. Yeah, the Bronx is very different, even though it's part of the boroughs of New York City, you know, because I worked in Manhattan for a while. And Manhattan, to get into Manhattan, especially on the express train from the Bronx, and again, one block down and then like a half a block was where the subway was. And I could be in a Columbus Circle from the Bronx, 59th Street in Manhattan, in 20 minutes on the D express train. And if I would have to get off at 125th Street, which if you went upstairs would have been in Harlem, and then you would switch to a local train and take it to 81st Street on the local, and you would come out in the Museum of Natural History. No, I didn't hang out in record stores. I went in record stores and did my business. Hanging out, no, I was playing in bands from the time I was 14. So basically, rather than hanging out in record stores, I was hanging out with the bands and rehearsing. Going into record stores, you know, to get the records that we would, you know, learn so we could play the songs. But I never hung out in a record store. Yeah, I lived in the Bronx for 30 years, a few different locales in the Bronx, and then I moved to Long Island on Suffolk County, you know, out in the boonies, going towards Montauk, but it was probably still another 40 miles till you got to the end of Long Island where I lived. I lived by Mauritius Bay on the south shore of Long Island. And then from Long Island, I moved to Woodstock, New York. Woodstock, the town, and not Bethel, where the festival Woodstock was held. Matter of fact, they were even in different counties. The town of Woodstock is in Ulster County, New York, and Bethel is in Sullivan County, New York. And then for the last years, I moved out of Woodstock and lived a little further north in the Catskill Mountains in a town called Hunter. And Hunter is one of the ski mountains in New York, of the Catskills. Actually, it's the tallest ski mountain. There's one or two other taller mountains, but they're not ski mountains. Yeah. Well, for me, you know, I think that's Sam who was speaking about Lilu and Lisa and JLL. Yeah, I just, as JLL has said many times, the most suppressed narrative on the planet is the Sophianic narrative. One of the reasons all of this, you know, you can find, it's pretty easy to find Hermetic works, even though they're called occult. And I want to get to that word occult, about what actually was hidden and why it was hidden. That word has been seriously messed up with. But the you know, fallen goddess scenario, the Sophianic narrative, is the most suppressed in every way. Including, you know, killing the keepers of those narratives, and the burning of the books, and one of the reasons you can find Hermetic texts without so much problem is because the Hermetic texts are part of the demiurge's system. They're a blend of what I would consider wholesome alchemy, the understanding of the relationships with energy, you know, the energies, the understanding the elements, their association with plants, gemstones, and the planets. But the Hermetic systems themselves, like things of Thoth and all the other guys, there's a reason why that stuff is available and has not really been suppressed. You might have had to join a secret society to get it, you know, whether it's the Masons or this. You know, that creates an allure. Now when you get that stuff, it's like, ooh, this is the good stuff. You know, the regular organized religions, that's for the masses. This is for the you know, the more capable of us. It's the same stuff in a different dressing. The Sophianic narrative is the original, and it's what is really suppressed. Sarah, have you listened to the Lisa Harrison? Have you listened to the John, you know, the interviews with Lisa Harrison and John Lash? A question like how old is it? Without context, I have no idea what the age of what is being asked. Who knows? I mean, Drunvalo, again, he's an, you know, I bought the Flower of Life books. I mean, I found the Sophianic narrative around 2010. So I was clueless in creation for a long period of my life. Okay, occult. Occult means hidden. And so any vestiges, the Sophianic narrative is probably almost thousands and thousands of years old as far as the beginnings of it. When it got coherent, it might have been like 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. When the original Magi would have been carriers of that material. So basically, occult, hidden. And what happened was when the people who even the folk, the pagans, you know, who had their folk relationships with nature, that became punishable by death, they started to hide those practices because it was real smart to hide what your beliefs were when the desert beliefs came about, because they didn't tolerate, they had a jealous God. They had death penalties for idolaters and fornicators and all the rest of that language that they use. So they started to hide both what they practiced and what they knew. And that's really the beginning for me of occult, as why things were hidden, because it was unsafe to be real, to practice the old ways. And then move along when the true old ways hopefully they thought were extinguished, and then the Hermetic systems come up and they start calling that occult. The Hermetic systems there's no need for them to be occulted. There's nothing there that would hurt the dominant sky father legal system that's on the planet. No threat at all from that stuff, other than you won't have somebody putting money in your plate, but you're still on the plantation. You're still in Jehovah's plantation. It's all based on that. It's all based on archontic nonsense.
They're ours, no question about it. They're also really tiny. I can't believe you tracked these all the way back to my store.
And it was just really interesting. I think I was watching a video on Robert Sefer, who I think his YouTube is Atlantean Gardens, and he was discussing gypsies and how the gypsies in many ways were largely a Kali sect, and so when they started moving around and running into what would then become Christian or even Muslim nations, they had to hide their practices. So those practices became occulted, or occult practices.
You should talk to them. They both worked here when we sold those earrings. They might remember something.
The reason why I put the two links to the interviews explain the Sophianic narrative, because that is where it happens. Either you get that, you finally feel like, oh, finally I'm home. Finally I have a socket that my plug fits in not only perfectly, but the juice comes back at me. That's what it's like to plug into the Sophianic narrative. It's like the socket and the plug is a perfect, it feels like the perfect fit. It's a really sweet fit. And then there is transmission. You transmit and you get transmissions back, and then you go, okay, I'm home. Finally home. And then you realize that also the planet is our home, designed for all the life on the planet, and we hold a special place. It's not so special that we can can do whatever we want on the planet and to animals and things, but we have us because of our ability to work in ways that will help bring some coherence, some negentropy to what can be an entropic system. But if creation is alive in a system, it'll never be entropic. I like the Dan Winter word that he came up with, which is negentropic. Oh, I see the word Lisa here. Hello, Lisa. So anyway, I don't know what I'm glad to see Raksha is addressing apparently what could be a kerfuffle. That's a Yiddish word I learned in the Bronx. And I don't think kerfuffle necessarily needs to be translated. I think it's a word rich in onomatopoeia or onomatopoeic qualities. So anyway, with the interviews of John Lash by Lisa Harrison, if the first one is not like you feel like okay, now things are getting clearer, now I'm starting to really feel nourished. If the first one doesn't do that for you, don't expect anything more from the second one. The second one is a gift if the first one did it for you. Because once you begin this, you want to enter into the dreaming. You want to be in a real world instead of the fictional, nasty world. I mean, again, it's, I guess you can't say it's a fiction, but it's a fiction of creation. Yeah, kerfuffles can make one go meshuggah. Or be a meshuggy. Well, thank you, Sarath. So context was kind of an operative word. And, the beauty of kind of not just, instead of, and I said this on last night's stream, but there certainly is more people here tonight, in that many were generally on YouTube, people who put out videos are called content creators. And one of our community, Kalendal, had seen something wrong there. And it's about being content with content. And then I realized, content creators are basically pacifying people with their content. Or they might be making them a little crazy, because again, there's the content that I guess some people might call it fear porn, adrenalizing content. So in that case, people are not necessarily content, but a lot of people seem to be content with being agitated. It's like, where's that adrenaline going to come from? They almost subliminally seek out that kind of stimulation, whether or not they acknowledge it consciously or not. So anyway, to me, this period of earth changes and what needs to go means that we should be in a spirit of discontent. And so from the moment that I made last night's video and actually made the decision after hearing Kalendal kind of parse those words out, I would no longer be a YouTube content creator. I'm going to be a YouTube context creator. And I'm not alone in that understanding or that comprehension. That this is no time for entertainment. This is a time for us to build concepts together, first online communities and then finding out about real life communities. Apparently somebody last night found out that somebody else in the chat lives a few blocks away from them or something, so a connection can be made. How cool is that? That, you know, there are now people who can like meet at a club, a bar, at a park, at a designated street corner. And it's really interesting how all of a sudden that popped up. I think it was last night that it popped up, or 2 nights ago. So there are webs of connection that are seeking each other out. And so the connections first get kind of made in the cybersphere, which is a kind of, you know, an archontic noosphere. But again, how there's a certain way whether tech uses us or we use tech. And if we're the ones using tech, well, you know, and we know the pitfalls of tech, but we also know the ways that tech serves us, well, then you kind of turn the equation around. It's all about the context. The context in creation. The whole, I guess, AI, robotics, you know, merging, you know, like kind of like bionic people, you know, like the bionic man, bionic woman, enhancing humanity with technology, those kinds of concepts. That's technology in a bad context, in my opinion. And certainly not alone there. So anyway, I did take my eyes off the chat and just went into my own screen, because I know I have good people in the chat. I have Raksha, I have Madfinger, and it's this way here I can stay a little focused, go in and out. So I'm gonna go in there. Hello, Reemsy. Yeah, Ontario. Wow, Ontario. I know somebody who might be in the chat that's in that area. So we've been joined by Squid Vicious. That's okay, Madfinger. Since you revealed yourself, that you were who I was referring to, but I wasn't going to give you away unless you gave yourself away. And unfortunately, I haven't discovered people online that are particularly close to me, and especially without a car. For me, I don't get too far, but I rely on the kindness of strangers, actually of friends. So I like what Sarah said. This is the network of light I was told about in the visions. Oh, man. So I don't know if I'm going to do my normal 2-hour show tonight. I've noticed a lot of us are starting to, kind of keep it to an hour. I mean, I'm not, when it comes to this show, I have no desire necessarily to keep it to an hour, except when maybe an hour is what it is. Usually when I'm getting ready to do a show on Monday night, my head is filled with goodies, places to go. Tonight, as I was approaching the show, I mean, even a title, fortunately, Raksha helped me out. I had, are you in the dreaming? Questions aren't great titles. Occasionally they are. Occasionally they work. But, context and creation is something Raksha came up with. He gave me like a menu, and that's the one I pulled out. Oswald, when it comes to JLL on Red Ice, I think it was detrimental to his popularity? Yeah, I guess you could say that, but John isn't trying to be popular. That's not, John is a teacher. John has a narrative that will restore sanity to the human species, the human animal, and then to the world. When we can enter the dreaming together. And then there's the Sophianic narrative, which is, to me, his kind of one of his main assignments from the planetary animal mother to get out. And then there's John, and the inspirations he gets from his Gnostic shamanism and connecting. But as any of us who do not shamanic type work, you get packages, you get downloads, and then you have to unpack them. And so there's people who disregard the Sophianic narrative because John Lash might have said some things on Red Ice Radio that pissed them off, is punching oneself in the face, in my opinion. It's one thing to not like everything the messenger says, and maybe I'm not sure I like the messenger. But what is the real message is the Sophianic narrative, and then there's, beyond that. I mean, the Sophianic narrative he put out in, I guess, when the book Not in His Image came out in 2006, I think that was. We're now in 2018, and there's, John Lash, the man, has his opinions about things on the planet. And so, so that's the other thing is, there's that initial body of work, the Sophianic narrative, that is the message. And then there's a messenger and all the other work that he's doing. And if people cannot separate the two, it's really more about them than it is about John Lash. Oh yes, Foxadre, certainly waiting for that new moon. And there is a globalist agenda to make a mush of uniqueness. It's kind of like to take all the organs in the body and turn them back into stem cells. And now, like, there's terms like, Oswald is using alt-right. I don't do rights, lefts, or anything anymore. You either have a good idea or you need some work. That left or right is just another social engineering program created by the very social engineers who first create these programs and then create the counter to that also. They are very busy keeping things a mess. Once we see the same old plan used over and over again, just in, kind of different angles to each other. Once you see the fuckery outright, you no longer play that alt-right, but left, liberal, conservative. You stop playing those games. You take yourself out of those boxes, because those boxes were not built by us. They were built for us to inhabit. So I know that, again, they're calling Red Ice alt-right. Red Ice might call itself alt-right. To me, that's on them. We need to lose that nonsense, that labeling crap. So yeah, AJ. I mean, again, AJ. He's brought up. He's read a lot of the papers, and he's certainly over his career brought some fuckery to light. But then he's also a song and dance guy. So, he's representing conservative, right. And then there's the liberals and the libtards. So I can't get on board with that language. I can't get on board with those concepts. That's just playing into the very game that he says he's against. We have to drop that shit. Chatelet. Again, we did not create those boxes. We did not create these systems. They were created for people to enlist in. And they're all driven by emotional triggers. They've kind of figured out that one group will be emotionally triggered here, another group will be emotionally triggered here, and then they create conservative and liberal, and then drop the triggers in. They drop the trigger points in them. So, anyway, so for me, conservative, liberal, all this is just silliness. And in certain ways, sometimes they even turn out being, inversions of each other, especially when they get really goofy. So anyway, I just, there's good ideas and there's crappy ideas. And when you have political systems, they take turns, okay, well, you have the crappy idea this time, we have the good idea. Then you get the good idea and we have the crappy idea. Okay, do I think left-right paradigm corresponds with the rise of Abrahamic religion? I do, because that was when the cognitive dissonance begins. The left-right paradigm is the inability to see the center, and that's cognitive dissonance. So you have this angry, envious being that's also supposed to be loving. I mean, the cognitive dissonance that is required to actually be in an Abrahamic faith creates the terrain that allows for left-right paradigms to go, because you actually have to separate the synthesis of what is being said in their narrative to realize, wait, this is crazy. This is absolutely insane stuff. And I think a lot of it, because of the way it was enforced, is also the Stockholm syndrome, as they call it. Don't want to pick on Sweden, though. Yeah, I don't find red ice to be particularly interesting anymore, because it's kind of picked a side on a spectrum that I think is not meant to be a spectrum. There are issues to be discussed, but not on a spectrum. We either, we have things that we see fuckery with and we want to address, but we don't start saying, well, we're here and then those over there, and then we start doing left and right stuff. That stuff no longer works. Kind of like once you enter the dreaming and your left and right brain work in tandem and there's communication, it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. Mm. Okay, I'm just going to turn off my camera for a minute and my mic, and I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So yeah, I think let me just kind of go in here because this is I think a good segue into context, because the left-right paradigm as politically, and that's just the United States. The United States generally has two major parties. So the United States is schizophrenic. Then you get into Europe where there's, or other countries where there's multiple parties, and I call that multiple personality disorder. And that's one of the reasons why this concept of cities and, the globe, things that are way beyond local, serve the social engineers, because there isn't a way for a community to think of itself as a community instead of like a city that has Democrats and Republicans in it and are not having conversations about how things should be. And one of the biggest elephants in the room, so to speak, that gets missed, that there's something inherently wrong with politics, or at least politicians. That you need a permit. In some cases, you need a permit to dig a hole in your backyard. You know what I mean? This is really what's wrong with government. Government is what stands between us and the earth. The use of the earth has been taken over by the government. And that's really where you can really see the madness of left and right arguing, Because the problem are the people who represent those paradigms to begin with. The system. I won't pick on the people. It's the system. Now, I think there's some serious psychopaths in the system, but the system itself is psychopathic, or at least sociopathic, and then it attracts the type of people that go, ooh, that's for me. I'm that sick. Matter of fact, I'm even sicker than that system. Let me go in there and bring my pathology to it. Yeah, as Lisa's saying, we never really own anything. We just rent it from the government. And nobody gave it to governments. Governments took it upon themselves. That's the creations of the city-states, the divine right of kings, and all the rest of that shit. All that garbage, divine right of kings. What a fucking sick psychopathic concept. Divine right. And again, what divine? Oh yeah, from heaven, you know, all this other stuff. We are earth-based in every sense of the word. The intelligence that created us is with us and has turned into the body of the earth. That is the most occulted information, the most hidden, suppressed, punished, exterminated narrative on the planet. And the Nag Hammadi texts, as they arose in their mishmash, hot mess, were not a threat. And then even the people who, you know, like Christians like Elaine Pagels, who went there and they saw, you know, they saw some heresy in there, and that's not what they really covered. Well, okay, Oswald said, how does Gaia Sophia Gnosticism differ from paganism in your view? Well, Gnostics, again, is a pejorative from the people who were not particularly learned, or in certain cases didn't necessarily have the ability to enter the higher mysteries. First of all, paganism has to be understood in where the word comes from. The Romans, the polytheistic Romans who were practicing their state religions, and with all their temples to Diana and Aphrodite and Zeus and the whole crew. And I know I think I kept it Greek, but I might have mixed in some Roman stuff. It's, you know, again, it's the same, you know, Jupiter is Zeus, Kronos is Saturn, but the Romans themselves, who had these polytheistic systems, referred to the rustic people who were doing nature religion, because what they were doing in the big temples in the city was not nature religions. It was religion. And so the Romans themselves, the polytheist state religionists themselves, called the people who kind of still kept the spirit of, you know, springs alive and streams and the trees, the animism. Those who kept, and that's really the core part of where we're talking about here, is animism. The state religions were not animistic. The pagans, which is the equivalent of hillbilly, a rustic, and you see that definitely in like the Anglo-Saxon word heathen, those who live in the heath, the field people instead of the city people. So pagan really means, and it comes from the Roman word pagani, is really the rustics, the nature worshipping people, as opposed to the state religionists. And so, and what happened was, you know, like when Constantine decided to make Christianity the state religion, basically, you know, like all the, you know, if you were a priest of, I don't know, of Apollo, it's like, well, you're now a priest of the Catholic, of the Church, and pick a saint or whatever, you know, whatever. It was just a conversion. It was kind of like a takeover, a not so hostile takeover from one bigger corporation of the other. This is everything about the patriarch, the patriarchy, and the city-states that come out of that is corporate in its concept. It's the creation of fictions that will stand as greater than what is natural. Oh, somebody made an excellent point. Well, I want to catch up on that. So, yes, telestai is actually the proper term, but the Gnostic gets used because it's known, and there is some tie-in with the telestai. Do not have a belief system; they have gnosis. The gnosis is experiential, the experience of your reality. You know, gnosis is fire burns, water is wet. That's gnosis. And it extends to our perception of the world, and then from the natural to the supernatural, because it's all a continuum. And one of the shamans transition from shamans travel enough where what is called natural and supernatural really, it's more like a curtain, where you might have to go behind the curtain, but you can still hear from behind that curtain. The curtain might obscure some viewing, but very often you have a lot of clairaudience from behind that veil. So you actually enter into where supernatural and natural are the same thing. Not because supernatural is natural. It's above, in frequencies, it's above. That's what super means, or supra. And so there was some. So yeah. Is the Sophianic narrative pagan? Yes, because it is nature-based. But the core of all of the nature-based practices is animism, that there is intelligence in creation, that creation is a part of the creator, and so therefore there is a certain respect for the natural world and the parts that including the stones and the rivers and everything is inherently alive. So the difference between polytheism and what I would consider the nature pagan or heathen is animism. And that's also, so that's really the core of the Sophianic narrative is animism. But it's an animism that isn't, there is like kind of a simple animism where even without any kind of discussion with others, even a child kind of perceives that the world is alive. And so that's where animism begins. And then as you start to progress in your journeying, and when you can sit down with other people who are journeying to a similar landscape, but everybody's kind of like has a different focus, and then you come and kind of map it out. Where you kind of like a map, think of the one map as being 2D, like a regular map you might have in an atlas. And then the shamanic journeying is get like the equivalent of getting in a car and following that road and going, oh, here's this thing that said, such and such forest, and then you're in the forest. And that's kind of the difference between shamanic journeying, where you kind of go there to the forest, and then you come back, and together you're going, okay, I was here, and this, I was there, and then you kind of start having the roads, and you start having a map. Okay, Raksha asked me a question. I have to think about that, Raksha, because that, you know, is a good question. Hmm. The Druids were certainly certainly had quite a bit of animism, and that's why they had sacred groves. That's why the oral tradition was important to them. They had an alphabet that was kind of based on, you could do it with knots, or you could also do it with slashes. You know, you could do, you know, a vertical line and how many horizontal lines. But the bards were the keepers of the oration. Although very often bards would create songs and poems to help people remember, to, you know, people sing along. And then the other part of the bard was to mock power by creating songs that mock power. My Go to Your Room song, to me, is something that I consider to be bardic, a bard type of song, mockery of power. Go to your room. And you know, the go to the room is the, like, you know, like, let's say, like the kind of people who went to the builder bugs, you know, who might be planning nasty stuff. Those are the people who are being told, go to your room. And in many kind of hinting ways before everybody sees what it is, and then it will be too late. I like Thomas Sheridan. I mean, he certainly, you know, he's somebody who I'm always happy to listen to, especially when John Lash is not being particularly busy. I enjoy him. You know, he's a proper pagan, and he's very much into the revival, and also something I said years ago, or even before I ever even heard of Thomas Sheridan, is, you know, the greatest sorrow of Ireland was Catholicism. Oh yeah, the Punch and Judy is pretty wild there. Largely Rimsey. I mean, they were largely an oral tradition, which is why it was so important for the Romans, and then St. Patrick. You know, when they say, you know, St. Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland, the snakes refer to the ancient wisdom. They're talking about the Druids. Those are the snakes. Which is, you know, and I mean, I don't, you know, I'm not into what works for a lot of people, which is telling the same story over and over again about how the organized religions and the Abrahamic religions are bad. Because then there are people who belong to those religions, and they're not the ones necessarily being addressed. It's the system. It's the system of thought that is the cancer, or the infection itself. And of course, embracing an infection can get you infected. But a human being, a human animal, is capable, or should be capable, of getting well. So often what happens, it's almost like, again, if, you know, one of the things that happens, if, you know, if you attack a political system, people have political affiliation, they feel personally attacked. And so nobody's talking about you unless you're putting yourself, unless the fiction that we're trying to bring down. If you identify as fiction and you insist on being a fictional character within a fictional system, then okay, then I can see why you're taking it personal. But it wasn't aimed at you. That's a choice. That's a choice that we make to be natural or fictional. And so, you know, and for me, it's really important as we try to cohere as the human species, the human animal on our planet. This is our planet, given to us to enter into agreements and common usage of it. And it was not set up to have city-states claim the borders and then to have the right of life and death over the captives within those borders, because that's what it is. It's this creation of a city-state is to take something, the human animal, a natural animal of creation on this earth, and then through borders they're creating cages. And then through whoever is the ruler or archon, because that's what the word archon means, is ruler. Whoever is the archon of that city-state has the power of life and death. This is fiction, people. This is a fictional system. This is not. I mean, just look at the Earth. There's no lines. I mean, there is no line between USA and Canada, between USA and Mexico. And of course, if you go back to, like, let's say early 1800s, where that fictional line was a lot different. Texas was Mexico. California was Mexico. New Mexico was Mexico. Pretty sure Arizona was Mexico. I mean, most of the Southwest prior to the I guess the Spanish-American War or the Mexican War was Mexico. Fictions. Theosophy and Blavatsky, the person if you want to really get a good dose of that, the Dark Journalist has been covering that over a series of his X videos. I don't engage in the Blavatsky stuff. I'm not saying anything good or bad about Blavatsky. It's just she's dead. And she was it seemed like she was playing a little bit with some of the Tibetan systems. And the Tibetan systems are interesting. Hello, Nish. Well, the interesting thing about Rudolf Steiner, and what's also interesting about Rudolf Steiner, John Lash was very involved in Steiner work when he had his I guess, epiphany and received the terma, or the treasure of Gaia, of the Sophianic narrative. Because terma means hidden treasure. That's what the word means. Although at that time it was Gaia Awakening, so he received the terma of Gaia Awakening, if I recall. I think that's the syntax he uses. But he was studying Steiner. Steiner broke away from theosophy because theosophy was becoming just another religion, and it was aiming to be a world religion. It was becoming very political. It was becoming, you know, well, who's on the inside and who's on the outside kind of nonsense. So Steiner, to his credit, broke from theosophy and created anthroposophy. And which is funny because you get the anthropos, which is the human species, and anthropos, wisdom, Sophi. So wisdom of the human species is what kind of anthroposophy would be. His biodynamic form of organic gardening is quite brilliant. His biodynamic preparations are certainly one way of really getting a lot from your soil. And the way the cycle, using the different cycles of the moon, basically, like whether there's, you know, there's the rising moon, the waning moon, you know, the waxing and waning moon, but there are also the in his case, I guess, there's zodiac that could, whether or not you were what you were planting, you wanted a flower, a seed, a root, or a leaf. And so he had broken those up into the 4 elements. Root, obviously, being the earth element. I won't go. I just remember that one. I forget. I think the leaf might have been the air element, and then, you know, so there was. So when you planted, now roots you generally plant on a waning moon, because that's it. That's when the energy is pulling back down. But, you know, then again, there's the earth signs, there's barren and there's fertile. And when the old calendars had little fishes on them, were actually telling you what were days that were good for planting. In other words, they were during what's called barren days. Hi, Kalendal. So, but, you know, you know, as somebody who has been a vegetarian for 27 years, I'm not a big fan of factory farming, of domestic animal consumption. I'm totally fine with hunting. Totally fine with hunting. Especially traditional hunting, where you were part of the natural world. And, you know, you would, there were contracts with animals. When you have like lions that are regularly interacting with a herd of gazelles or wildebeest, there are certain contracts that go with all that. And the Native Americans had their understanding of what proper hunting would be and what improper, or the kind of hunting that would be an error in the way things were done. And so there was, you know, when you didn't take more than you needed. You didn't, you know, wasn't about being greedy. You needed something from nature, and it was there. That's what it was there for. You didn't need a permit. See, that's where the moment you go to do something in nature and somebody says you need a permit for that, that should be like the sirens go off and you go, bogus, fiction, nonsense, must come down, must be destroyed, must be ripped apart, must be dismantled. And then we can have the earth back. We can't have the earth back while they're claiming the right to it, and while they pull sections of our own kind, the common people, and stick a badge on them and say, okay, these are the rules, and I'm giving you a badge. So if your brother or sister or your friends do anything, well, you've got some rules to enforce here. And you start seeing the pathology of that system. You know, the wars, the people who start wars, they're not on the battlefield. So, I mean, how much more fictional can it get that the people who start modern wars have no skin in the game? And I mean real skin, not investments. Yeah, it is. There is the problem, like in Woodstock, where I lived in the Catskill Mountains. It was deer country. Deer loved it up there. But it, it became a cool place for a lot of the yippies, and some of the hippies. But even that's how Woodstock became. The yippies kind of became the aristocracy, and the hippies were who worked in the stores. The yippies owned the stores. The hippies were the workers. And so it became kind of like a little kind of Manhattan in the mountains in a lot of ways. And so hunting was no longer something that people did. Now, when I moved a little further north into Hunter, I mean, I had my neighbor across the street. He went hunting as soon as hunting season began, and you knew when hunting season was begun because you'd hear everybody sighting in their guns in their backyards. And I never saw him go out and not come back with a deer, because he wasn't going out like, a lot of people would come up from the city and they go out hunting. They were just getting away from their wives and girlfriends to get drunk with the boys, and bringing home a deer wasn't the thing. The men and the women, it was basically men who hunted. When they went out hunting, they went out sober. They knew they knew how these animals were. They knew the kind of land they liked. They were like they hunted like a wolf would, except they had rifles. And so, I knew lots of people when I was down in the Bronx. A whole gang of them would go hunting and come back with nothing, except a lot less ammo. Where the people I knew up in Hunter, if they went out hunting, they almost and because they would sometimes go out for a few days, so they always came back. I'd go across the street, he'd come back, I'd go in his garage. There'd be at least 2 deer usually, being kind of hanging and aging a little bit in his garage. The coyote skin that I've shown was when the coyotes got too prevalent, he would take out some of the save some of the deer guts. He'd put it out and bait the coyotes and take them out until their numbers thinned. Because they had no natural control animal. The wolves were gone. Wolves have an influence on coyote populations. So, oh, hello, Connie. And hello, Mythophrenikus. Didn't greet you. So anyway, getting back to Woodstock, I grew up in the Bronx, and the main, there were pigeons. We had elevated trains, so the pigeons kind of lived under the elevated trains. Park a car under the elevated trains, and you got a coating. Stand underneath those elevated trains too long, and you would start slowly getting dotted. So anyway, but as far as being indoors, the Bronx, any small places like that, and even in Manhattan, roaches were definitely an issue. And so when I was up in Woodstock, where there were no hunters, in many ways, I used to say the deer are like roaches up here. I mean, they were everywhere. They were a hazard for drivers. And again, us building roads and traveling along at 40, 50 miles an hour through what used to be forests. It's kind of hard to fault the deer for us building roads through their forests. They're our forests too, but forests weren't designed for, a ton plus of metal moving at, 30 to 60 miles an hour, through a forest. There's something very unnatural about that. Oh, Morris Park, yeah. That was a little south of where I was. I was up in the 180s. But I live one block off the Grand Concourse. Anybody live in the Bronx knows the Grand Concourse. And I was a few blocks south of Fordham Road. And it was on the Grand Concourse and Fordham Road that I ran into an acquaintance and somebody I'd played with who I knew as Paul Fraley and later would become Ace Fraley. When he showed me the picture, he said, "Hey, I'm in the band. Do you want to see the picture we have?" And he showed me a picture of Kiss in their makeup. This was on the corner of Fordham Road and the Grand Concourse that he showed me his press photo of Kiss. Okay, Christian, be well. Yeah, I mean, I remember, there were, if you didn't, I mean, and the problem with the Bronx is, if you poisoned your apartment, they would just run to the unpoisoned apartment, and then as your poisons wore off, they'd move back in. They just shifted. They just moved. And to exterminate a whole apartment building was getting pretty, could be pretty dangerous to all, it's, and I remember, the roaches in the Bronx were legendary. I mean, you could move a clock that had been on the wall for a while, and if you took the clock off the wall, you'd have a crowd there, like a shadow of roaches hiding behind it. I mean, it was pretty intense stuff. And when I played, okay, I'll call him Ace Fraley. Again, we knew him as Paul. It was in the Bronx. It was a little bit more north than where I live. Ace was about I don't know, I'd say 5 or 6 blocks north of where I lived. He lived off the concourse. We're going north. So he was like a block or two east of the Grand Concourse, and I was 1 block west of the Grand Concourse. But he was north. And so, and then there was a place that was up by Mosholu Parkway, which was getting fairly north in the Bronx. And there was a studio there, and that's where a friend of mine booked the studio. A friend of mine actually, he paid for the studio, and then he got me on bass, he got Paul on lead guitar, and he got Willie Albino. That's what we called him. Willie was an albino, kind of he looked like Johnny Winter, but he was Puerto Rican. He was a Puerto Rican albino. And he was on drums. And this other guy, Glenn, was vocals and harmonica, and we jammed for 3 hours. And that's how I knew Paul. I mean, he was a couple of years older than me. And so he was with the slightly older crowd, and he was also he had started playing guitar earlier than me. So it was a little slight division. But this happened, I guess, probably when I was around 18 or 19. And I'd been playing the bass for a few years and was starting to get my chops together, so it went down well. Yeah, I see the buffering. So anyway, I did see a thing about wild pigs. Yeah, wild pigs are they tear shit apart. and they're mean. That's a wild pig is a dangerous animal. Well, even traditionally, boar hunting was the most dangerous of all hunting. There were a few rulers who went out, to prove their manhood boar hunting and got carried back on a stretcher. And part of that is because even if you kind of get a boar really well and it's in the process of dying, until it actually lays down and dies, it'll tear your ass up. Tear your ass up. So boar, and that's one of the reasons. Some people pick the boar as their totem, and that was because it's just like Galicia. And you can, for a warrior culture, a boar is, that's getting really up there. And then of course, very often with your totem animals, you would then hunt them in a ritualistic way, and then you're consuming the flesh of your totem animal to take its spirit into you. Oh yeah, yep. I was watching some video in the past couple of days, and it was talking about elephants in the New World, and it was a little bit riffing on Sylvie Ivanova's New Earth stuff. And they were showing some animals that to me clearly looked like they were certainly related to elephants, but there was an animal that they showed that they was claiming was like some kind of elephant, but not only did the tusks come out of the side the way a boar or a wild pig's were, but I looked at the feet. Have you ever seen elephant feet? They kind of have, toenails and whatever. I looked at this animal that he was saying was evidence of elephants in a New World. It had cloven hoofs. It had pig feet. And that's what kind of bugs me, is when there isn't enough, let's say in this case, zoology or even animal morphology of, okay, this has a long nose and it has some tusks, but the feet clearly define it as, being a porcine animal and not an elephant. And it was so obvious. Like, look at the feet. Those are pig's feet. The elephants do not have feet anything like a pig. Elephants don't have hooves. And especially not cloven hooves. And so that's, that kind of stuff bugs me. When there may be a case in point for that there were elephants in, the Americas, but please don't have some kind of long-nosed, almost tapir-like wild pig, and you're claiming, that, boar tusks or elephant tusks, and the feet are completely different. Ugh, it really bugs me, because that's what turns somebody who might be actually come from, like myself, have like a real science background, and then you see them doing, and it's like, that's sloppy, man. That is really sloppy. What are you doing here? I mean, make your case, but know your animal morphology. Yeah. So that's one. There's unfortunately, I think there's a lot of times valid ideas, and then things get sloppy, and that's where you don't have true. You have people with opinions and intelligence, but not the kind of finer detail of things like zoology or animal anatomy. And then they start riffing. And then if somebody who has some learning go, oh my God, this is just crazy, and throws out the whole thing, where there were some instances of what looked like would have been elephants in every other case, but in this they were presenting every kind of long-nosed, tusked animal as being in the elephant family. And like I said, you're not with cloven hooves. You're not in the elephant family. Yeah. There's something going on with that, Sarah. I don't, again, it's our consciousness. There's so many distractions, and that's not a necessary. I feel there are most of the distractions, especially when we haven't even. Once you embrace the Sophianic narrative, you realize that the other, what are we doing here? We have a world, a new world to build on the earth. And this isn't time for, chasing this and chasing that. It's about, we'll wake up all in good time. All that stuff will get clear. But I get there, but we're not, the whole part of being aimed, to be a telestis, or telestai is you aim at your target. And right now the target is the planetary animal mother, who we are, what our relationship is to her, and the horror, the nightmare that is on the earth right now in the form of city-states and rulers, archons. I mean, the rulers are archons, and then there's the ones who influence the psychology of that. So, there's kind of a line of archontic behavior from the supernatural on down, in the continuum of supernatural into the perceivable, moist, wet, beat your head against it kind of natural. So anyway, we're coming to the end of this edition of Can't You Hear Me Gnostic, Context in Creation. I think we're kind of danced a little bit around context. But as I kind of want to close on, I think that what part of the focus will be, is that instead of being content creators, we're context creators. And the context is where the conversations, the discussions, the being human about ideas and what do we want to do together. And we do that within context, not content. Because right now, being content is not what's called for. Not when there's anti-life forces at work. This is a bad time to be content. So it's a time for discontent, so that discontent drives the solutions. Thank you, Lita, and thank everybody for coming in and joining in to this context in creation, creating context. Thank you to the moderators for allowing me to really kind of keep a focus on what I was trying to do tonight. It was hard for me. You're welcome, Reemsy. I wasn't in my natural flow. There's so much happening in the periphery of me being in the dreaming. Because right outside that dreaming is a lot of screaming. And just because you're in the dreaming does not mean one turns a deaf ear to the screaming. So, anyway, thank you, Sarith. And I look forward to getting that email address from Foxadre. And anybody, I mean, I'm trying, what I want to do is I really want to have some Gnostic, you know, kind of, or let's call it Sophianic narrative-based meetings with people, so that we can kind of, because we're all, you know, to do this is to get downloads, to have things to unpack, and for us to be able to gather and unpack what's going on, and also for us to develop our own shamanic, our Gnostic shamanic skills, so that ultimately John isn't all alone. I mean, he has said before, he is all alone, but one of the reasons he's teaching is so that ultimately he's not all alone. And so that I would call them campfires. But this is, you know, I want a campfire from, you know, from a Sophianic narrative perspective, and not knocking other ideas around, because we have things to unpack with each other, and for growth within the narrative. So it's, you know, it'll be Sophianic narrative based, and that is the context. That would be the context of that. You know, there can be different kinds of campfires, but some of the campfires I need to have is with other people who have entered into the dreaming. And fortunately, I do have that. Raksha is somebody who is there, and there were other people in the chat. I'm not going to, you know, mention names. So anyway, that's the end of this show, and again, thank you all. I'm kind of I'm ready to just kick back and see if I go into some peace and get a purpose for lighting a candle and do that. I want to write down something before while I can. Okay, so good night, and I'm just going to turn off my streaming and just smile a little bit while it ends.